We have this dream to build a 5-story robot emerging from the canal, holding a floating skate park, linked by an invisible acrylic walkway to Crazy Golf Enlightenment Island, where you get to play for your soul. I'm Dave, I'm from Mabos, a regenerated warehouse space just down the road, and it is a space that defies categorization. I have this growing fascination with how cities develop, and every city has aspirations. Dublin, for example, has the Dublin Development Plan and the SDZ. And my fascination lies in the comparison between these aspirations and their actual realizations. What I find even more fascinating is when you kind of get in there and you begin to work it out, you realize that no one's really in control. There aren't 13 people in the control room surrounded by TV saying, excellent, this city is progressing perfectly according to plan. It doesn't really exist. And there's been this monumental socio-economic shift over the past 20 years, and cities are now at this quite pivotal moment in reimagining their identity and, more importantly, where they are going. And there is a certain element of the unknown in whatever path the city plans to take, and I'm quite intrigued by that. Like, what are we as a city, and where are we going? Have you ever asked yourself that question? And there's this constant progression and evolution that is happening all around us, all of the time. And a city is the sum of these elements and the sum of its people. And what that means is this is our city. It is my city, it is your city, and both individually and collectively, we have a very strong voice in the way our city moves. Now, through my experiences over the last 8 years, I've gone from being one of passive observer to active participant in my city, and I now see a real value in more people having that sense of ownership and duty of care for their city. I want to take you to a time not so long ago, 8 years ago, when skateboarding was prohibited on the streets of our city. Government were spending vast sums of money skate-stopping public places and crucially failing on the flip side to identify the need to facilitate. And when you look at the value of skateboarding, it was shifting youth culture to something more activity-based. It was highly skilled, creative, and most importantly, accessible. Accessibility is a key characteristic because access to activities directly leads to a more socially cohesive, tolerant, engaging cityscape. Now, in response to these realizations, coupled with a growing well of public support, the government allocated €2.1 million to the development of 21 skate parks around the country, and this was a transformational decision. And it is a clear example of the power of our collective voice. Now, even a man as distracted and singular in his focus to build giant robots as I am, was able to work out this fairly basic equation which helps illustrate this. An activity with unquestionable value linked to a growing well of public support equals a progressive shift in policy. So on the back of this transformational decision, we went to put on a one-off event. And when I say a transformational decision, this is what made it a transformational decision. It wasn't just about facilitating skateboarding. This decision was a nod from the official powers that be to all of these fringe activities, vibrant, that lived on the fringes of mainstream culture. It was like a beckoning in out of the cold. And our event then, and this is, like where a small shift in policy results in quite a big change. Our event went to put all these activities together and celebrate them, from skateboarding to graffiti, parkour, breakdance, BMX, and so on. And all of these photos are from our festival in Wood Quay. And the City Council, with respect, they saw the value of this, and they approached us to take this to an annual event. And it was kind of like piecing a jigsaw together, where these activities on their own didn't really warrant a festival, but collectively became this explosion of like color and energy. And our festival, as a result, Kings of Concrete, was born. And then what ensued year on year was this continual sort of adding in of peripheral activities as they emerged. And this sort of creative collective began to be sort of born out of that. And it was quite misfitty, mismatched. It was a collection of like skaters with teachers and graffiti artists with barristers. So we've kind of begun to share this sort of creative objective, which was to host these activities in continually more surreal and elaborate settings. For example, our graffiti guys, instead of having them painting walls, we decided we'd build giant robotic Easter Island heads, obviously, and we positioned these down the hill of Christchurch, kind of peering into the festival. Then we built a life-size train carriage replica, which we positioned in the walkway, and we crash-landed a giant rocket into the roof of this with smoke billowing out. And the idea was to kind of psychologically flip people so they'd enter our space. And people started to love it, and this kind of in turn fed us to create bigger and better. So this was a 2-story robot we built that towered over our festival, kind of dominating the space. This was what we called the greatest crazy golf hole of all time. It was a par 12, robotics, mechanics, ended on a floating island. We started to get a kick out of this idea of experiential entertainment, providing entertainment beyond the norm. And everything at our festival had to have an edge. Nothing of standard was allowed, even down to the signage. And something started to happen, right? We had kind of tapped into something inadvertently much bigger than us. And it was triggered in people who came to our festival. And it wasn't really what we did that triggered this. It was why we did it. Because this was creativity for the sake of creativity. And it was about breaking the cycle and realizing that life is not a test drive. Waking up and seeing all these wonderful activities around you that are accessible and just getting involved. And this resonated with people, and it resonated with us. And it was never about the money, because there never was any. It was about the camaraderie and the kind of connectivity of that journey. And we were on this cycle. So about 2 years ago, we maxed out that space, and then we thought, right, what next? And we begun to dream the ultimate festival. And this was dreaming the big dream. Money was no obstacle. And it's the beauty of dreaming. No one can regulate your dreams. And we had this idea, this kind of welcome to the future idea. So our skate installation became this 5-story robot emerging from the canal, holding a floating skate park, and so on. And that's only a little nugget now of the actual overall vision. But we realized at this point that dropping into a festival for 8 weeks was only ever going to get us a 2-story robot. We needed to commit to this project. And it needed a home and a HQ and somewhere to house this vision. So we came across this old, disused, unloved warehouse on the forgotten block of Hanover Quay. And its lovely position, actually, is in between this very contemporary architecture and then this forgotten block. And there's a lovely contrast between the two, and there was a real charm to it. So we begun regenerating this space. And as we were regenerating it, we thought, what's the concept of the space going to be? And we started to come up with this idea of the flip mechanic, where this space would continually shift between activities. You'd never experience a space in the same way, and it would constantly evolve. And when I said Mabos is a space that defies categorization, this is what I mean. It is a space to build 2-story robots, but it's not a factory. It's a space to create art, but it's not a studio. It's a space to learn, but it's not a school or a college. It's a space to play and be entertained, but it's not a bar or a club. It is a space that doesn't remain within its own walls. It grows and it filters out into its community, and it is a space for everyone. And this is Mabos. And it lives and it thrives off the support and the feedback and the reaction it gets from people who not just engage with it, but people who wander in off the street and they're like, holy, what is this place? Nice robot. I have no idea what you guys do, but I love it. And that's kind of like this reaction. It's really common. And here's some of the stuff we've done. The first thing we did was we built this 2-story robot arm, and it was crashing up to the ground. This is still on display in the place. And this was our 5-story robot emerging from the deep. This is a giant Game Boy we built in perfect detail, I might add, with this pallet light fitting. And the giant Game Boy has a built-in Wii with a bowling lane and stuff, so it's quite a lot of fun. Again, this is this experiential entertainment kind of tact we were on. All of the furniture is made from old pallets and skateboards, and again, nothing standard, This is actually a 3D Space Invader making workshop, which we had disputes about going live with, because it was like, no one's going to come to that. And it actually sold out. Like, there was enough people to come along who wanted to make 3D Space Invaders. Who would have thought? But now that's not to say every workshop we do left field is a resounding success. We've been faced with many an empty workshop over the last year. But yeah, and then we have this initiative called the MEITHEAL initiative, and this is an example of how we grow beyond our walls. So one of our observations on moving down into this neighborhood, which is brand new, by the way, and didn't exist 10 years ago, is that there was a very densely populated corporate audience, a very densely populated residential audience, and this is sandwiched between two very old communities. And in all of that was a really strong kind of disconnect, and we thought maybe there was a way of beginning to build these bridges and create a sense of community and identity in a place that didn't really have one. So this was one of our initiatives under the MEITHEAL. And MEITHEAL, by the way, is a very old Irish word that stands for the collective effort for the greater good of a community. And it's got no direct English translation, which we thought was kind of interesting. So we used that as the name of the initiative. So the idea for this was a daily rollout garden. And the idea really was to create a space for chance encounter, right? So we'd roll out these really lush plants and shrubs and a help-yourself herb garden with a ping-pong table and a chess table and lovely pallet seats and cushions outside the front of our warehouse, which is, slightly industrialized kind of space. And the idea was you just happen upon this really lush, engaging environment that would kind of draw you in. And our thinking was that, some old lady from the flats walking her dog was going to end up sitting down and playing a game of chess with a young French Googler. That was the theory that we put out there. And it kind of worked to a certain extent. So yeah, that's Mabos. And if you look at what we have then, right, at this point, we have an activity of unquestionable value, in my opinion, a growing well of public support, completely consistent with the City Council's aspirations, the dream. What could possibly go wrong? Well, on the 14th of June, our project was effectively railroaded by the powers that be. And again, when I said this is a space that defies categorization, this is a problem for the City Council because this space doesn't fit neatly into a category within the current structures. And what that means is you get forced down these prohibitively expensive paths. I'm not going to go too deep into it, right? But they force you down these paths in order for you to become compliant with a structure that you just can't fit into. And these paths are largely built of administrative cost. And this, in turn, financially suffocates everything, and your project will implode. And this was devastating for us. What had begun as a project of creative passion all of a sudden had us down this rabbit hole, digesting development plans and working out angles and delay tactics in complex legislation. And the truth is, I don't even know what I'm doing here, really. I just wanted to build a 5-story robot. And what this structure is saying, right, and this is the crux of it for us, because what that is saying to, not just to us, but to all of us right now, is that only those with money are allowed to play in the public realm. And that is a fundamental flaw with the current structure. And the crazy thing is that everyone I spoke to, from senior city planners to architects to arts officers to enforcement officers, there was this underlying will of support. I could really feel it. But underlining that was a growing sort of sense of frustration. And it wasn't that they wouldn't help us, it was that they couldn't, because the policy doesn't exist yet. But the will does. And what city councils need to start doing now is they need to start actively supporting spaces like ours. And the implications of this are going to be huge. You are going to see the emergence of vibrant hubs of grassroots creativity that is going to enrich the veins of our city. And just like the skateboarding situation, small shift, big change. And the great cities that will emerge over the next 20 years are the cities that will be dynamic enough and progressive enough and flexible enough to identify and facilitate these changes. This is not about our project anymore. This is now about your project, because everyone has a 5-story robot. And that is ultimately the point. Do you really want to live in a city where there are no 5-story robots and never will be? Or do you want to live in a city where there are? And that is your choice. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.